My microphone because I'm so intelligent. All right. Whomp. Okay. I'm just gonna assume that everything's going well because OBS is saying it's going well. YouTube is showing things, so I'm sure you guys hear me. So I'm not even gonna do my usual tests. I normally, in fact, I don't think in almost my whole decade of doing this, I've ever live streamed at night, let alone almost 1 a.m. But I'm gonna do it because, as the top of the description shows, or really the only description so far in this actual live stream, as it's doing live streaming, I normally am not in a position where I have laryngitis starting up and things like that because I've recorded so much recently, and as hard as I try to make it as clear, concise, and direct, it just don't work for some stupid reason. So as a result, I've been averaging like hour and 45-minute videos recorded, 2-hour videos recorded, and I still have to edit those, and that makes it a pain to edit. So I figured, fuck it, I'm just gonna live stream. Literally pull a Bill O'Reilly, the famous one from the GIFs and everything, say, fuck it, we'll do it live. So that's what we are doing. I forgot to link the video in the description by default, but in fact, what I can do is I can just do this real quick. Whoop, bam. And then go and grab this and just put it in there. Little video. There we go. And then I probably can pin it, but a lot of things have changed since the last time I've done a live stream, so things are getting in the way and stuff, so it's not going to work apparently. Don't care. Anyway, so the point of this whole live stream is to do what I would do in a normal video, just record it, but instead do it live. We're going to be reacting to this video. I've actually already watched it, which is one of the reasons why I actually wanted to do this, because I feel like it's a really good way to do what I feel like is a really important, good PSA. I actually have some personal experience that really triggered the, not so much an impulse, but almost a feeling of a desire and a feeling of a need to do this for like some sort of awareness, for mental health awareness, let alone for trauma awareness, trauma response awarenesses, and just being able to hopefully help show you and guide you into how to identify like when somebody is really struggling with something mentally, because things for this man are brutal and you can tell. So I'm just gonna start it up. It's a wild spelling of that name. It is Pierce Transit, okay. I had a feeling. So like the main point of why I wanted to do this was because of just like a bunch of shit that people somehow either intentionally ignored and went blind to. Again, it would have to be entirely intentionally, or they really lack the like having a deep ignorance of like how this kind of stuff works and what this is like a great sign of besides just the mental illness, because it's a sign of two other things for sure, but also my personal experience when I was a child, when I was a kid, when I was really little. This, what you are hearing and you are experiencing from James Colell here, is exactly the same. It is identical to me when I was having my meltdowns when I was a child. Exactly the same. See, because you usually, when you have these kinds of meltdowns like this from something especially otherwise seemingly so mundane and basic, it's always a combination. It's an explosive cocktail of things. It's not just mental illness, it is also trauma, and it is also, and especially repetitious trauma, and it is also from at least those two, usually also autism's involved, because the autism is a trigger, has a lot of triggers on its own besides the triggers you get from trauma. You also have the autistic triggers, and then sometimes they can actually morph into the same thing. But either way, you have multiple sets of triggers, and when autism's triggers are set off, usually simply by via being overwhelmed and just too much stimuli, too much stuff going on for you to be able to handle and process, just too much all at once, you have what are called meltdowns. Sometimes you can call them explosions or blow ups or whatever else. Implosions. All terms are correct because it just depends on what matches how you feel the most as somebody who's autistic who has these meltdowns. And a lot of times, autistic meltdowns can look and sound exactly like that. Again, especially when trauma is also involved. And in this case, the more you watch through this video, the more you listen to what he's saying, the more you find that this dude has been through a absolutely horribly shitty experience in life, his entire life. And this meltdown is because he was triggered by the simple action, and then everything else just tumbled on top. The questioning, the lack of trust people have with him, the way people look at him, the way he's automatically denied his basic rights to do stuff like getting on a bus, getting to his appointment to pick up his meds, obviously, therefore, at his psychiatric physician's office. So therefore, he was probably also going, since he said appointment, it was probably not just for to get a refill on his and pick up his medications. It would have also been to actually get his psychiatric, see a psychiatric physician and actually get mental help, meaning that he is taking the necessary actions, unlike what a lot of people have been saying for some reason. He is taking the very necessary actions to be able to do his best as possible to help himself find some sort of stability. And, that's via also the medications and everything else. And now he's being denied that. He's also being denied the right to approach the bus, whether it's because of smoking or whatever else. Likelihood is this is a reference to something you'll consistently hear, especially as we get further into this, which is that he experiences trauma triggers via being denied, or aka what it would be called in therapy would be called invalidation. He's consistently invalidated, ignored, not listened to, not taken seriously, not given the help he literally knows he needs and or asks for or tries to get. And I know that from personal experience that even right now, as I go through my therapy still as an adult now, that with my therapist, it's easy to identify that like one of the core sources in forms of trauma for me is invalidation from exactly the same kind of scenarios and sources. That's why sometimes in the modern day, I can still be triggered by invalidation, by not being taken seriously, by not being listened to, by not being considered to know what I'm talking about or whatever it is. I can be very triggered by that because, especially if I'm like very impassioned about whatever it is I'm saying that I know or I'm sharing my knowledge of, it's very, very personally triggering for me, even now. Obviously, again, this is why you go to therapy, so you can try to work yourself through it and everything else, which obviously is very important to do, but it can, therefore, with my autism, can cause a meltdown. My meltdowns are incredibly different than they were when I was a kid, where I'd literally lose my mind, just like this guy. I would just have a complete break, just total emotional and mental breakdown, and I would just explode. Call them meltdowns, call them explosions, blow-ups, whatever. These are all the main three terms I've always used in my life. And mine now, it looks very different than it did then. It even looked different when I was a teenager. Usually, not always. But this is exactly it. Like, I literally made my throat bleed so many times when I was a kid. And when you're autistic, you have to consider with the triggers from the trauma, it's amplified by so much intensity because of the autism, because it automatically is guaranteed to trigger your autistic triggers, because now you're already overstimulated, you're overwhelmed, you're struggling at your peak, your apex, you're literally losing your mind, you're losing yourself, you're losing your grasp on control, you're losing your grasp on stability, you're losing grasp on calm and everything else, and you can't recover. The longer that you're triggered and the more that you are triggered, the more stimuli you're force fed like this, the worse you get, the more chaotic you get, the worse you deteriorate your health, the more you shred your throat, the more it bleeds, the more you beat on yourself and you beat on other things, the more you just, because it's just that much more stimuli, that much more overwhelm, to where literally the reason why this is the reaction you get is because you literally have absolutely no ability and no outlet, no way to handle it. It is so intensely overwhelming. It is so far beyond what you are personally able to handle and process and get through that literally you explode and melt down and implode at the same fucking time. Because your body, your brain, your heart, literally every fiber of your being cannot do anything. It's in a paradox, it's in a locked state where it's like there's nothing I can do to alleviate my stress. There's nothing I can do to express myself. There's nothing I can do to say how I feel. There's nothing I can do to help myself. I just can't. Like you literally lose yourself because what else can you do? you explode because you literally have nothing else but that you can do to try to vent, to try to let out and get rid of and expulse as much of this energy as possible. And so when people try to help, quote unquote, especially when they're ignorant and unknowledgeable, like these police officers are, like the fellow compatriots around him, the bus driver, the citizens, or whatever else, um, they don't know any better, unfortunately. So it's not 100% their own fault. But at the same time, this is why you need to educate yourself. And this is why observational education is so incredibly important and imperative. Because if you observe, especially firsthand, like these police officers, if they just observed him and they listened, they truly listened, just like anybody watching this video, they would be able to pick up so much valuable information and insight into this man and what is the best way to handle him in this state. What you will find as we go further into this video is the fact that whenever they leave him alone for enough time, he gets quiet and he finally calms down a bit. In other words, they get what they're trying to get the more you progress through the situation with him and transiting him and everything to the jail. But the police officers don't make that observation. They don't learn from it. They instead immediately begin to question him again or make comments to him. And guess what immediately transpires? He gets set off bad. He goes right back into this state we're hearing him in now. And the reason why is because that's triggering. And it's triggering because it's too much stimuli. The moment you open your mouth, the moment you are engaging that person, and when you're engaging that person when they're autistic and they're already having a meltdown, you're just going to set them right back off again. You have to back away and you have to not engage them, not speak to them, not socialize with them, give them as much space as possible, and just leave them alone. That's the only way that people like him or me can truly recover when we are having something this intense going on. We have to vegetate. We have to be left alone. We have to be just not spoken to at all. Because the moment we are, especially when it's something like this kind of situation, you are fucking yourself and the person in question, in this case James here, over so hard because you're just going to trigger them immediately again. They usually, when you go through something this intense for this long, we need weeks, sometimes a month straight alone to just be a vegetable and just decompress and recover fully from it. It's brutal. This also shows why the police desperately need to be required on a national scale. All police departments and all police officers have to, at some point, we have to get to common sense where they are given proper training and education on not just conflict de-escalation, but also this kind of observational education per individual, especially when it comes down to emphasis on trauma, mental illness, and of course, things like autism. So that way they can better handle the person and they can better speak to them and better address the situation and better handle it so that everybody has a better outcome and everybody has less stress on their hands. He's right. It's not that simple. See, that's one of the biggest problems in responses that people get is that when you're dealing with somebody like this, the last thing you want to do is get mad yourself. The last thing you want to do is ever raise your voice. I know it's tempting. I totally understand it. I've been on both sides of the fence. It's the worst, most wrong thing you can do. The best thing you can do is not say a word. Don't say anything. Just let them get it out of their system. I am serious. It is genuinely the by far the best thing you can do. Also, I can say from personal experience, something that is actually a very triggering thing, especially when you're in a meltdown state, is when somebody tells you basically it's a you problem. In other words, but you can fix it just by a change of mindset. So basically, you change your mind, or you can take complete control over your brain. I just be like, oh, yep, I don't have mental illness anymore. No, I don't have triggers anymore. I don't have no, I can't have. I don't have meltdowns anymore. You know why? Because I chose not to. Because I am responsible for my reactions, my behavior, my emotional state. That is like it's whether you realize it or not. That's literally what your argument is. That's your base. That's the logic broken down into simple form. That is what you are suggesting and saying to the person is it's a choice, and you're choosing to be a you know a mindlessly angry prick, which is utterly bullshit. It is totally false. When you make comments like that, it proves a deep ignorance and or a lack of willingness to believe and trust in true reality, because likely it is, it's just deeply uncomfortable for people to accept that some people genuinely cannot control their emotions, or they cannot control themselves, especially when certain triggers are set or whatever else. Nobody usually looks that deep into things when they need to, but in this case, whether you do or you don't, the problem is exactly that. You are triggering further. You are being, whether you realize it or not, an arrogant prick, and you are suggesting that, oh, you can choose to calm down. You can choose not to react the way you are. You can choose to be happy. You can choose to be this. You can choose to be that. You can choose not to react. You can choose not to be angry. You can choose not to do, which is all complete fraud. It is totally untrue and false. It is a lie. And it is so insulting to say that to somebody, especially when they are in a state where they are melting down. Even more so when they know they have issues. They know they have a fucked up past. They know they have triggers. They know they have trauma. They know they have issues of some kind, whether it's autism, whether it's some mental illness, or a combination of the above. It doesn't matter. That is egregiously insulting. Like, no, learn never to say those kinds of things, and also learn not to respond with anger or with a raised voice if you respond at all. And better yet, just learn in these situations to not respond to the person at all. Let them get it out of their system is the most simple, important thing that'll achieve the calmness the quickest. It'll take a long time though. Another key aspect of this is, do you notice how James here is, whenever he's melting down again, he's not only referring to his life so far and his past experiences, he's also referring to what he was trying to do to help himself to potentially alleviate the situation, which is to go to a psychiatric appointment and also pick up his psychiatric medications, which of course he was now denied again. In other words, it proves that he's been denied this ability multiple times, whether because he has a meltdown or whatever potential other reasons he may have encountered throughout the times and the years. You'll notice that he's also stuck on the point of, in the moment in time, now in the past technically, where he got triggered, and the whole incident itself. This is so classic. It is something that, again, especially when I was a kid, this is very me. It's also even me now to an extent, just in a little bit of a different way, but I get stuck. And what my family has always used the term of harping. You harp on something. In other words, you got your hooks in it, and now you're just stuck on that one thing or that one detail or whatever it is. And it's almost always associated with the trigger. Whatever it is that, in this case, the person who's having a meltdown's mind, or having a break's mind, or somebody who's just the strongest and most intense reaction of everybody involved, in their mind, well, in this case it's James, oftentimes, again, comparatively to myself, that all that matters is the exact trigger point where your reaction started, and thus when all this went south, is what the colloquial term would be, right? What most average people would call it, is when this started, or how it started, was with this, such and such, you said this and I said this, and then you responded this way, and then blank, whatever. And then that's what set me off. In other words, that's what set you off. In other words, that's where everything went to shit. That's where I got triggered. You get stuck on that one point because it's the single most important thing to you. Because if you think about it, what is that reflecting? It's defense. Because that's the trigger point, and that's what it's causing as a defense mechanism. It's what we call survival mode. Your body literally goes into high cortisol, high adrenaline self-defense mode, which is literally a primal survival mode, a mechanism in our bodies. And that's how we respond to the triggers from trauma and sometimes autism, or the combinations thereof. And he's exhibiting this to a T. I also think it might actually not just be traumatic. I think it actually is more likely to be the getting stuck on the one thing, and the hyper detailed, that one specific, sometimes that tiny little detail, and moment in time, fraction of time. And so because of that, I actually have I think it's more likely to actually be autistic, that aspect of it. So it's like, again, the combining of the two, because obviously you can't have a trigger event where you get triggered heavily traumatic by your trauma, your past, without the autism, if you have it, causing a further meltdown and going to an autistic meltdown in the process, causing the survival mode to go more intense for that reason. Because you're automatically overwhelmed, there's too much stimuli going on. Now it triggers the autistic response to meltdown as well. So it's something to be cognizant of. Cockle. I didn't catch that. It was loose. So you notice, right, how, again, like I said, he calmed down. He got quiet. He calmed down when he was left alone. When nobody was engaging with him, when nobody was talking to him, he got quiet and he calmed down. Legitimately. It was only once he was engaged again, they socialized with him, they asked him questions, they told him certain things, they gave him certain commands, they told him their wishes, whatever else, that he then got really escalatory again. He highly escalated again. You'll notice that. Also, you'll notice he got more defensive and more aggressive in his responses to the police officer who was transporting him each time the cop got more aggravated and raised his voice further, because that further escalates. That's just going to trigger the person more in that situation. Thus, why I said that before, my point. It was ironic, by the way, and completely coincidental that both times I paused this video, that what I had just expressed and said then immediately was reflected. I Those were not at all intended. I didn't even know when they happened in the video. So that was weirdly well timed by mere coincidence, but that's the truth of it, man. He calmed the hell down, you know. And also, you got to remember that he literally had said that, you know, wasn't gonna work. He consistently throughout the whole thing also complained about how clearly nobody listens to him, nobody hears what he has to say, nobody heeds what he says, you know, because they just don't seem to care. They don't seem to give a fuck. And I find that to be one of the saddest things in the world, is that, like, this is something I personal direct experience with. And the even like the way he was, you know, say in this case, his case was using his head to just like smash it as hard as he could out of anger and just like out of being overwhelmed into the partition and the police vehicle and onto the doors and everything else. um that, you know, he was responding with, I can do what I want, it's my body, you know, whatever else, like, in other words, shut the fuck up, leave me alone. And he kept saying leave me alone. All of this reflects exactly what I was saying, and it's also to a T exactly how I talked when I was having my meltdowns. Especially every single time somebody was trying to talk to me about, like, I wish you wouldn't use, you know, I wish you wouldn't do this, or I wish you wouldn't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or that's bad, or this is bad, or this is negative, or that's unacceptable, and this is unacceptable, and this blah blah blah. And I know from personal experience how much more that triggered me, because how much more that pissed me off, how much more that felt like an attack, because for me, that was once again not being listened to. It wasn't being taken seriously. Nobody listened to a word I said. It went in one ear and out the other because of God knows what fucking reason. But nobody listens. And you know, it's just a repeat of everything you've always experienced so many times over again. And I find that to be one of the saddest things about it. It's just like how avoidable all this is, how easily you could have picked up on these different cues, these different situations, and nobody did. Nobody did. Not a soul. It's the worst thing in the world, especially when you're somebody like him in the situation he is, having this meltdown, knowing still nobody actually truly gives a fuck. Nobody actually cares. the best thing a lot of times you can actually do for people like this is actually listen to them, like genuinely heed what they're saying and listen to them, especially when it's about themselves, because you will gain so much more information and knowledge and understanding for that person at that point. And they a lot of times will actually, and again, I'm speaking from personal experience here, they actually do know what they need the most. And it's not up to you to determine that sometimes, no matter how unhinged or unstable or whatever else you think they are. You know, sometimes they still know fully exactly what they need when they need it. What's best for them in that situation. In this case, leaving him alone was a great case in point of that. Not engaging with him was a great case in point of that. There is so much educational value in this whole fucking incident situation. It's ridiculous. And admittedly, it might actually be highly beneficial that I've had, in a weirdly morbidly twisted or roundabout way, may have been actually highly beneficial, and I might have been blessed with the fact that I experienced what I did growing up, because it allows me to have an infinite amount more experience and perspective on this exact kind of scenario and this exact kind of case, and somebody who reacts and melts down like this guy has done here. And it clearly he's done it multiple times before. So because of all this, I can all but guarantee that James Khalil, however you want to say that here, has not just his mental illnesses, he absolutely, I guarantee, has a hell of a lot of trauma, a lot of it, and it just keeps getting brought and triggered over and over and over again. Even whatever age he is now in his life, it's still happening to him relentlessly, which is why he melts down like this, because everybody has the breaking points. And obviously he's been dragged into that, or ended up at that breaking point so many times. But then there's like a secondary breaking point. That's the one where literally somebody might off themselves. They literally might end their own lives, because what's the point, right? It's one of those things where it's like it happens one too many times and nothing changes, to eventually, why the hell do you even live? Why are you living? Why are you here? And you take yourself out, because what was the point? And the worst part is you know deep down inside that made perfect logical sense why they would think that way and why they would do that, because nobody listened to them, nobody trusted them, nobody believed anything they had to say, even when it was about themselves and what they needed, because nothing changed. Everybody responds the same way every fucking time. They don't stop to think that maybe there's a different way we need to be treating these people. Maybe there's a different way that we should be caring for these people, or talking with them, or addressing their issues. Ultimately, this proves, though, that also, not only, again, do police officers, LEO, law enforcement, desperately need this specialized kind of training to not only identify these things and be observational, so observant towards each individual person they're dealing with, especially when they seem erratic or whatever, or having a meltdown, having a crisis, but also every single department not only needs that specialized training, they also need people, or an ability to be able to have something like Oregon has, which is what's called a POH, a police officer hold, which is something where they can not only hold them for their own safety and for other people's, but also to take them to a psychiatric hospital or ward for not just evaluation, but again, for their own safety and for the safety of other people, to get them potentially the medications that they need, that they might not have in their systems or whatever else. These things are so incredibly important to have available and have as a consistent theme. On top of that, another thing that it really shows, improves, and educates on is just like how broken the mental health system is in this nation, in the US, because it's practically non-existent. And even when it is there, so frequently and so often, it's either not covered, or even if it is by, say, Obamacare slash the states, so the American Care Act, it's also a lot of times that there's a shortage of psychiatric specialists around. there's a shortage of clinics, or that they're practically inaccessible. And that's a huge problem. Another aspect that could contribute to this also is highly corrupt mental health institutions, because the fact of the matter is that there is so much corruption in a lot of them, especially the ones that are like for the homeless and for the otherwise, very poor. Um, the Portland, so neighbors down to the south of Taco Town here, and Lakewood and all that, the whole Puget Sound region, Seattle Tacoma area. We have multiple different agencies, including in city proper downtown, Portland, in this case, Old Town. We have the Old Town Clinic, and we have Central City Concerns, so CCC. You'll hear about them all the time if you know anyone who's homeless and or mentally ill in Portland. They are the biggest and the most common ones that you will hear about because they're the most commonly used ones. But you would not, motorcyclists, you would not believe the amount of intense corruption at both of those organizations, because holy shit, my eldest brother Nathan had, for most of his adult life actually, had direct experience being a patient at the Old Town Clinic and CCC and dealing with them. And the last few years of his life, or whatever the hell happened to him, he was not getting a lot of his medications, and sometimes he was out all of his medications. He was very severely mentally ill, but he wasn't getting any. And the reason why is because of how incredibly corrupt that organization is. And obviously that means that the state itself is also highly corrupt, although tell Oregonian what else is new about how intensely corrupt and uncaring the fucking government of the state of Oregon is. But like, it proves their corruption in that department as well, because they refuse to do anything about it. They refuse to address it. They won't talk about it. They won't investigate it. They won't look into it. They won't do anything about it. It's been going on for years and years, over a half a decade, if not longer now, of how intense that corruption is at Central City Concern in Portland, along with Old Town Clinic. So that's another thing you have to consider, is like people like James here who have very bad mental illness. They know they do. They're trying to help themselves. They're trying to get to their psychiatric appointments and get their medications and everything that they need for stability. And they just, a lot of times you might find out that they are actually often struggling and having triggers and breakdowns as well, because of the fact that they don't know, or they don't have the ability to do it, or maybe they are dealing with somebody who's really corrupt. A corrupt pharmacist like the Old Town Clinic's famous for, or here in Portland, or whatever else. He might be dealing with consistently like lack of accessibility. There's so many reasons and so many things, that moving parts that often are true for the mental health field, and even more so when you're homeless like he is. And then also imagine the negative stigmas and the treatment that you automatically get, and the dirty looks and everything else that you get, and the distrust and the hatred you get, the animosity you receive, the lack of empathy you receive when you're homeless and when you're mentally ill. Now combine those two together. That's got to be really triggering and really overwhelming for somebody in his position. It's disgusting. And in this case, him being arrested and going to jail so many different times already for his mental health crises, his meltdowns and psychiatric breaks, like he's literally experienced here in this very video, that unfortunately the entire world has to see him at one of his lowest points and his worst in his life, which is really sad and unfortunate for him, especially again given those stigmas, right? You have to consider that he's been to jail so many different times. He didn't mention anything about an experience of going into a mental health institution, going to a psychiatric ward for an evaluation, going into a mental health hospital, an institution of some kind. What am I thinking of? An insane asylum. He may have never been there, or one of those places in his life, because that's the state of the mental health system and the mentalities around mental health in this nation, in the United States of America. It's negative and heartless. It's careless. They don't actually care. If if anything, this exposes the reality of how there's not remotely enough mental health hospitals and psychiatric wards. There's not enough physicians and specialists in that department to help people with their mental health and addiction struggles. And there's not enough beds in those places, the few that we do have around, to be able to handle them. Again, let alone not enough physicians and specialists in the mental health and trauma and addiction treatment field in this country. They might as well not even exist. It's one of the worst, saddest things in the world, because people like this do not ever belong in cuffs going to jail. When they are in these situations, no matter what criminal behaviors or things they have done, it is because they are going through a psychiatric mental and emotional breakdown. They went through a break. They're out of control. It's because of their illness. It's because of their trauma. It's because of their autism or whatever else that they're having these meltdowns. The only way to help them is to get them what they need, which is the mental health care. They need the mental health specialty. That's what they need. They should not be in cuffs going to fucking jail or prison or penitentiaries and being prosecuted like that, like they're a horrible piece of shit and some, intentionally malicious person. They're not intentionally malicious. They're just very mentally, psychiatrically, and oftentimes emotionally broken people that have had a really shit hand at cards and at life, and it just keeps seemingly getting worse for them. Like James literally said to him, it doesn't change anything. He's been there so many times before. It doesn't help anyone. And obviously he's right, because he's been here in this exact position, being arrested and putting in jail so many fucking times. It's ridiculous. Which is exactly, I think, the biggest problem this exposes right there. You should never be arresting these people. You should be putting them into where they belong, into a mental health institution of some kind, some program where they have some residency, even if temporarily, for just an evaluation for their own safety. Whatever it is, there needs to be these specialized places and physicians and programs in place where whether it requires a police or not, to be able to take them there when they're having these episodes, so they can get the medications they need, they can get the evaluations they need, they can get the care they need, the treatment they need, and the space they need, and the facilities they need. Because a jail doesn't fucking help. The only thing that does is that. So yes, James is absolutely right. It doesn't help. It's proven that he's been there multiple times, and obviously, therefore, inevitably, that means so many others that have been through mental health crises have wound up in jail instead with criminal charges, rather than being treated as criminals, which they shouldn't be, but rather people going through a mental health issue. We need to fix that problem desperately here in the US. There's no empathy out there. There's no understanding. There's no will by most to understand and learn about what the real causes of these things are. In order to stop this stuff from happening, no, you don't need to quit your job as a fucking transit cop. You don't need to fucking remove yourself from the situation, because you're not helping yourself or anybody else either, because it's still happening. That's just you turning a blind eye by being lazy as fuck, trying to convenience yourself and make yourself more comfortable. It's not arresting the person. That doesn't address the root cause. That doesn't address the root of the problem. You have to get to the true root of the issues in order to ever remedy and cure them and fix them. So as long as we're doing what we're doing, banging our head against the same brick and the same brick wall over and over and over again, like we do here in the US with mental health and the justice system, everyone, especially who is mentally ill, is fucked. And there's nothing they can do. They are damned. They're in a no-win situation where they're going to have to suffer the torture for the rest of their lives of being ridiculed, being hated, being seen as a criminal, when in reality, they just need mental help. And they know they do. But instead, they just get put in cuffs and thrown into a 4x4 foot fucking concrete and metal cell to rot like they're just a horrible piece of shit. And it's the saddest thing. But I digress. That's all I have to say and need to say about the situation. And I hope to God that James here gets the help he needs. I really hope they do. In fact, if anything that this kind of footage and video can do, and whether it's mine on this video or the video itself, I hope to God it spreads that kind of awareness, that PSA, helps educate people and gets a movement going to change things for the better once and for all, and force that change to be able to benefit these people and get them where they need to go, to no longer be in cuffs, no longer be thrown in prison, but instead get the treatment that they need, whether it's mental health or it's addiction treatment, or both. Because those two are very different, separate things. Same with trauma. That's why there's specialties. There's specialists in autism. There's specialists in schizophrenia. There's specialists in dissociative disorders like multiple personalities and dissociative personality. The other personality ones. There's specialists for I think I said autism already, but autism. There's specialists in trauma. There's specialists in addiction, because they are all different things, even if they're all mental and or emotional, and maybe even cognitive, which autism is actually cognitive more than any others, if not exclusively. In the end, they have specialists for that reason, because they are very different issues in very different parts of your brain, and they need therefore different people to help them with that, which is why I separate addiction care and specialist and treatment centers from mental health and psychiatric centers, because that's an important aspect of it to remember as well. And again, I feel bad for him because he's homeless. He's homeless and he's severely mentally ill. And that's really sad. Let's just say that's only all I'm going to say there, but the replies in some of these threads are just brutal to look at, and it just shows deep ignorance for so many people, like this one specifically. Yeah, like his poor life decisions, huh? And then there's somebody else deeper in the thread that's like, oh yeah, he's on narcotics. At no point was he indicative to anybody, including the police, that he was high on anything. This one, I hope he has to pay for all of that. What the fuck? And then this one is a huge piece too. He needs some empathy, but he also has to take responsibility for what he did. Even got places to be, You notice how this completely shows either ignorance or just an arrogant ignoring by choice of what's really going on, which is that the dude is suffering massively mentally. He's going through a fucking meltdown and a crisis, and this is just treating him like he's everyone else who doesn't have any mental illnesses, who doesn't have any trauma, who doesn't have this or that. He's just some arrogant, angry person who just was mad because he didn't get to go to his mental health appointment, and that's it. What the fuck is wrong with people like this? I swear most of the time these people, what they're doing is they're choosing not to listen and not to care, not to see what's really happening, because they just want to have confirmation bias and pretend that, oh no, they're just, I guess mental illness is some fantasy. There's other people in this thread who are saying other horrible stuff, like, yeah, see, here's the narcotics comment. It isn't hard not to lash out like that. It is a behavior that can be controlled by anyone. No excuses. Utterly false. This is one of the most fraudulent things you could ever believe. That is not true. Certain people, the quote-unquote normal people, the stable people, without trauma, without triggers, without anything that might affect them, yes. But when somebody like James here, no, this couldn't be more fiction, more false, more of a lie, more insulting, because this is so untrue in that situation. Highly autistic people, when they're triggered, you can't control that, because here's the thing. If this was true, if the idea that it's just a choice, and that's all it is, then literally anyone with a mental illness, with trauma, with emotional issues, with personality problems, with you name it, with autism, anyone with those things. I can use myself in that department with the trauma and the autism. You would literally just simply wake up one day and choose, you know what? I no longer want to have my mental illness, so I'm not going to have it anymore. And then magically, you're cured. You don't have a mental illness. That's literally the logic that is used in this exact kind of mindset. Whether they realize it or not. That's literally what this in translation says, is it's a choice. You can choose not to be mentally ill. You can choose not to be triggered. You can choose not to have trauma. You can choose not to be autistic. You can choose not to have meltdowns. It's your choice. You're choosing to be mentally ill. They may not realize it, but that's literally what you are saying in translation directly. That is literally what this is. That's, if you break it down to the most simple logic that is used here, that's what that logic dictates, is you have to choose. You can choose not to have issues. That is sick and twisted and incredibly fictional, incredibly false. And then here's this. His mental state is his responsibility? Again, that's the same logic is what's used here that I just explained. This is just to suggest that you have a choice. You can choose not to be mentally ill. You can choose not to have trauma. You can choose not to be autistic. If that was true, there'd be no mentally ill people. That's a fact. There'd be no mentally ill people. There'd be no autistic people. There'd be no traumatized people with PTSD, because they would literally, obviously, if this was true, choose not to have any of those traumas, choose not to have their disabilities, choose not to have their wiring that is autism, that different kind of mental wire or cognitive wiring than the everyday average person. That's what autism really is. It's not even a mental issue. It's not even some sort of a psychiatric thing. It's literally just your brain is wired differently for some reason. It has different neural pathways since birth than in conception than the average person does. That's why we function differently. We think differently. We perceive differently. We react and respond differently a lot of times for that reason. It's because we're just wired differently. But like a lot of people, autistic people would choose not to be autistic if they had the choice. If it was really our responsibility, aka we can choose our mental state, why would we choose to be mentally ill? Why would we choose to be traumatized? Why would we choose to have something like autism that causes us to be outcast and or otherwise deeply misunderstood to the extent that a lot of people think we're just dicks, we're just arrogant, we're just this, we're just that? Why? It doesn't make any sense. Now I'm actually done though. So hopefully this has some sort of value and hopefully it can be somewhat educational. That's the hope. I digress. Thank you for watching. If you did, obviously, all the way through, I appreciate it. Again, hope you learned something. I hope you stay safe out there and have a great day. And hopefully you can now have more understanding and empathy for people who have meltdowns like this, because it's entirely needed in this day and age, because it seems to be extinct.